We saw lots of fantastic talks on establishing studies to identify new drug targets, very personalized drug targets, but many of them, and almost all of them, are targets that impact the body systemically. Mitochondria, sRNA, fibrosis. These are things that if we're going to use them, we're going to have to deliver them in a very targeted manner. And this is where we come in on our work. We develop biomaterials for this type of application, regenerative medicine, and with the ability to help deliver those very, very high-impact therapies to where they need to be when we're using them. And the platform that we use is a group of family of materials called polyurethanes, and I'll show you why we're using those shortly. I will talk a little bit about the versatility and our ability to process them into various applications and give you examples of where we are using them in the vascular area as well as the cardiac area. So for those who have done any kind of work with biomaterials, the last 3 decades of work, very, very important work, has taught us how biomaterials interact with the body. They're foreign for the most part. The early biomaterials used were pulled off the shelf, had interesting physical properties, and said, this looks like a valve, this looks like a heart, this looks like a blood vessel, let's chuck it in and carry out the physical function. And as a result of doing that, we discovered that proteins bind to these materials, and then those proteins get unfolded and changed, and they create reactions with cells that we don't necessarily want to have. If we're really, really lucky, we head to the to my left-hand side of what I'm looking at. I guess your left as well. And things all repair themselves. If they go bad, then you get a foreign body response, and the body tries to fibrose around this thing and wall it off. And that is something that is completely unacceptable in the area of targeted drug delivery, because that would be kind of 2 steps forward with your drug and 3 steps backwards with your biomaterial if you wanted to deal with the fibrosis issue. So should go back. On the right-hand side is a whole list of all kinds of very interesting molecules, which will be familiar to many of you. Some of them were talked about this morning, that are very, very important to control if we're going to have regeneration, repair, effective repair in the body. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm not going to force you through your organic chemistry. It was a traumatic enough experience, I'm sure, for you the first time that you did it. But just to show you the fundamental block chemistry that we work on here, it's based on isocyanates and hydroxyls reacting together to form a urethane. If you knocked off the last oxygen on the right-hand side, the thing actually looks like an amide function, so possibly could belong in the body, given that that's the key function that builds all of our proteins. The other interesting thing about polyurethanes is that they're block copolymers. So not only do we have the ability to actually incorporate a lot of diverse chemistry in there, we actually have the ability to create phase separation and create a microstructural template over the chemistry. And if this sounds familiar, it should sound familiar, because that's a lot of what proteins do. They have the ability to form unique domains for a particular function and encapsulate a lot of different chemistry. We did something a little bit unorthodox, not we actually, these 3 postdocs here who worked in the early days, Kyle Battiston, Mei-Ling Yang, and Soroush Aripur, took the ends of these early building blocks in these structures and put vinyl chemistry on the ends of it. And anybody who knows anything about the dental world, and even if you're not a dentist, but you have gone to the dentist, you realize that you can walk out with a $600 bill for about 20 seconds of light curing of a resin composite, right at room temperature. They carry out organic chemistry in your mouth. You open it up, they pour in the chemicals, and you're there. So it's a very, very convenient type of chemistry. Vinyl chemistry allows you to do a lot of in situ manufacturing that you can't get away with a lot of other polymer systems. So we incorporated vinyl groups on the tail end of that big oligomer that you see written there, divinyl oligomer. And in the middle of that block, we can put literally whatever we want. We can put things that are hydrophilic, hydrophobic, that degrade fast, degrade slow, don't degrade at all. and then incorporate other small vinyl monomers that carry carboxylic acids, that carry cationic groups, that carry hydrophobic domains. And as a result, we can build chemical systems with unique distributions that have the ability to dance with proteins in a way that we do not unfold them such that they will, or denature them such that they will activate immune cells in the way that classically shared with you. Now, if you're going to translate all of this, you have to give thought to literally every component that you put in there. What you're trying to create initially that's going to interact with the biological environment at the beginning, and what's going to come apart. So for instance, we knew our materials had to be degradable. We don't want the biomaterial around after we don't need it. So the byproducts that we want are CO2. They're not lactic acid. Lactic acid, which is a building block of probably the gold standard of degradable biomaterials today, polylactic acid, polyglycolic acid, which is pervasive throughout the system, generates materials that are pro-inflammatory. So you need to think about how things are going to finish off. You put in things like, you start with a lysine diisocyanate. You don't start with an aromatic diisocyanate, which is carcinogenic. A lysine diisocyanate, when it degrades, produces lysine, something the body can actually use when you go back. And then the HEMA building block that we put in for the vinyl chemistry. And if you're going to use catalysts, make sure you get them out of there because for the most part, they're toxic. I'm going to skip that piece and jump into a bit of the biology. So if you take these formulations now that you have a lot of degrees of freedom to work around with, you can dramatically change the world of your biomaterials. This is a comparison of one formulation of our building blocks, these DeFi materials that we call them, and comparing it just to a total protein absorption that PLGA, a typical PLGA system that is used currently in the biomaterials field to deliver drugs, and tissue culture polystyrene, something that's near and dear to the heart of probably most biologists here. And you can see right away that these materials that we created with this diverse chemistry love proteins. They love interacting with proteins. And if you were living in the 1980s, putting a biomaterial in the body that you already knew took up a lot of proteins, you would say that's probably a bad thing. Biomaterials should be inert. They shouldn't even dance with proteins. But the reality is that they need to be able to dance if we're going to have regeneration. Then you can ask, well, if you could look at the different types of proteins. So if we talk about immunity, we would need to be concerned about immunoglobulins because they are the tag, you're it. We're going to identify you and there's fibrosis that's going to go on and we're going to wall you off from the world. So immunoglobulin G, for instance, and it's interacting with materials, despite all the protein that DeFi absorbs, it's a fraction of what PLGA picks up. So polylactic glycolic acid actually loves the protein that tags it as a foreign body. And it's no surprise then that we get a gigantic foreign body. So one would say, well, we should probably make everything out of TCPS because it seems to have a low tag. However, it's not only about what you take up, it's about what you unfold. This is a comparison of tissue culture polystyrene with DeFi, the first, and their interaction with human monocytes that we extracted from peripheral blood. On a non-coated surface, you can see that our DeFi material actually seems to like these cells, but you can see on the top side a little bit more activation of those monocytes on that TCPS. If you go and pre-absorb immunoglobulin on that TCPS, it's fireworks. It's a big dance, and it's not a nice dance. It's one that will lead to fibrotic. But yet, if you look at the DeFi material down there, even with IgG purposely on it, you can barely tell the difference between those monocytes sitting on one surface versus the other. And we spent a bit of time trying to understand what aspect of immunoglobulin G would be activating these substrates. And lo and behold, it's not FC, it's not what our immunity tells us should be guiding all of this, is the Fab binding domain of these materials, which probably tells us something about how unique and differentiated biomaterials are as they interact with these systems. So now we use a Fab assay to actually define particular formulations that we want from this big platform family. And anytime we see a low fab, that's a biomaterial that we can use and go forward with. And just to show you that we actually confirm the ability to reverse that whole IgG phenomena with TCPS by blocking fab in the system. So, and it really doesn't matter if you do this in humans with urine serum proteins. You look at that IgG phenomenon in human serum, fetal bovine serum, or no serum at all. You can clearly see that DeFi on the right shows that low fab phenomena. If you're a picture person like me, then you want to be convinced. You can look at the difference between TCPS here and DeFi on both sides. Again, looking at pre-absorbing IgG, our fibronectin on the right-hand side with the DeFi materials. Pretty low activation. You can't barely tell the difference between no coat or these proteins. But yet, on the right-hand side with tissue culture polystyrene, you get random phenomena. If I pre-absorb fibronectin, I get 1 degree of activation. If I pre-absorb IgG, I get another degree of activation. And that's the type of randomness that will kill your therapy as you select your biomaterials. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you, and if not, perhaps this slide will do it. This is looking at IL-1 beta, IL-6, TNF-alpha, all big markers of pro-inflammatory character, and you can see on the left-hand side the DeFi materials and their release when you expose human monocytes to this material versus what you get with PLGA, what you get with TCPS. And we're just in the process of working with Tony Gramellini's group now to look at the whole proteome, really, of monocytes. And you clearly see those 3 left-hand columns are PLGA. So there's some proteins that are familiar, or are similar to those of DeFi, which are the 3 middle panels, and TCPS. But then there's a whole slew that are upregulated, that are not upregulated on the others, and a whole slew that are downregulated. And there's a lot of interesting science still to be done there. All right, so I said this is a relatively versatile platform. And these are all the kinds of different things that we have done with these materials. We've made tubes, we've made fibers, we've made particles, nanoparticles, large particles, foams. That's how versatile you can be with this. And since this is a session on cardiac, this is where we have taken this platform with many collaborators here in the audience. We have made coatings with a group in France for stents, and I'll show you, I'll probably have time to show you a little bit of data on that example. We have made vascular grafts. We're working with Mark Hertzberg over at Sick Kids on the development of vascular graft materials for tissue engineering. And if there's time, I'll talk a bit about that. We are working with groups on Hailing Chang on the delivery of growth factors for repair, and nanoparticles with Ron Cohen and Tony Gramellini for the delivery of non-viral Cas9 with CRISPR technology and guide RNA on these systems. So just to show you the impact for those who are familiar with the clawing pathway and the importance of tissue factor in it. If you're activating monocytes, you know that tissue factor will be a byproduct of that, and it will dramatically impact the result of this material. So this is a comparison, again, TCPS, you're showing high tissue factor release on the system, cobalt chrome, which is an alloy used to build stents, and then cobalt chrome coated with albumin, which is a typical protein that you would use, passivating protein that you would use to try to reduce platelet activation on biomaterial substrates. And then 2 polyurethane versions from this family that we've used that show the reduction in tissue factor. And the impact is quite substantial. You can see your tissue culture polystyrene up on the top side activated, but look at your cobalt chrome. So if you're ever wondering kind of why everybody is worried about the importance of reendothelialization and clotting on stent systems, in metallic stent systems, that tells the story right there. But the 2 bottom ones are the 2 materials, the 2 formulations that we have put on the stent. And you can literally see monocytes sitting on there, almost the pristine size that they are and swimming around blood. Those cells almost think that they're swimming around blood in a relatively stable physiological state. And again, if you're picture people, you can stain for the fluorescent stain for the tissue factor, and you can see the cobalt chrome. 2 out of the 3 cells are lit up like a Christmas tree, and the 2 on the bottom with the proteins are fairly clear. And that's the end result. That middle top slide tells you why it is important to be considering your biomaterial element. This is without flow, so it's a tall test because it's static, all right? But you can literally see at the bottom a mixture of some red blood cells, some platelets, and some monocytes just sitting there waiting for what are we supposed to do next here in the system versus the massive clot that has formed up on the top side. So we're applying this to vascular engineering, as I said, and I'm going to skip some of these examples here for the sake of time. But I do want to finish down here with these last 2 examples on cardiac. We have figured out how to spin these materials through the air and shine a light and cure fibers as we're producing these things. And that has given us the ability to actually culture cardiomyocytes on these things in an aligned manner, pre-coated with either matrigel or gelatin. It really doesn't matter. You get the same organizational result in comparison to the mix-max of the state that you get with gelatin down at the bottom. And on this last example, which has really captured my imagination, the ability to actually produce nanoparticles that we have now loaded various types of proteins, but we're getting excited to do the pivotal studies this summer with regards to loading Cas9 with guide RNA to see if we can impact and deliver these things to the nucleus to make a change in these disease cells. And just to give you a little bit of, I think what I am finding very exciting, this was early stuff done this summer with a plasmid and GFP. And what you're watching here is over the course of hours, the cells light up. These particles are finding their way into the nucleus, carrying the plasmid, creating the transformation. Obviously, it's dependent on cell type. That's one of the things that we've discovered, and we're going to be able to work around. But with the versatility of this type of platform from a chemical perspective and microstructure, and processing, we have a lot of tools on our hands to be able to translate this. Needless to say, there's a lot of people to thank here, a group of amazing collaborators. You know, if there's a shout out to put out there for the difference that the Ted Rogers has made, not only in my research, but the difference that we've been able to make in other people's research, it is certainly the network and collaborations that have generated as a result. I'd probably say in 3 years, we're up about $4 million on grant funding with new collaborators. And it's the tip of the iceberg. This is just the beginning of the translational pathway. So kudos to Rogers Funding, Medicine by Design, CICHR, and NSERC. And that's it.